Ambassador Park Jin-woo adjusted his tie nervously as he walked through the massive crystal corridors of Station Nexus 7. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, and strange alien symbols floated in the air like digital butterflies. His footsteps echoed against the smooth floor that seemed to be made from some kind of living metal that rippled gently under his weight. This was his first time representing Earth at the Galactic Council, and honestly, he felt like a caveman visiting a spaceship. The other ambassadors gliding past him looked like they belonged in a science fiction movie. There was a floating jellyfish creature wearing what looked like a crown made of stars, and a robot that seemed to be built from liquid mercury that kept changing shape as it moved. Jin-woo clutched his old leather briefcase a little tighter. Inside were his handwritten notes, some pens he'd bought from a convenience store back in Seoul, and a kimbap his wife had packed for lunch. Pretty basic stuff compared to the holographic displays and floating data cubes the other delegates were carrying. The security checkpoint ahead looked like something from a dream. A massive archway made of swirling energy stood 30 feet tall, with scanners that looked like giant soap bubbles floating around it. Behind a control panel that resembled a pipe organ, made of light crystals, stood the security team. The lead guard was a Valkyrian, and Jin-woo had to crane his neck to look up at him. The creature stood 9 feet tall, with 4 arms that moved independently, each one covered in what looked like living armor that shifted colors from green to purple. His face had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle, and when he blinked, it was like watching 3 camera shutters close at once. "Contents for declaration, human delegate?" The Valkyrian's voice sounded like wind chimes mixed with thunder, coming through a translator device attached to his neck. Jin-woo set his briefcase on the scanning platform and popped it open with a friendly smile. "Just some papers, a few writing tools, and my lunch." He gestured to the contents like he was showing off treasures, though he knew they probably looked pretty pathetic next to everyone else's high-tech gear. The briefcase contained exactly what he'd said. A stack of papers held together with a metal paperclip, 3 ballpoint pens, a mechanical pencil, and his wife's homemade kimbap wrapped in aluminum foil. There was also a small notebook with a rubber band around it and a tiny bottle of correction fluid. The security team leaned forward with their various eyes, sensors, and scanning devices. A spider-like creature with 12 legs and a head full of blinking lights chittered something in its native language. The Valkyrian guard's 3 eyes rolled in what Jin-woo hoped was amusement rather than disgust. "Primitive Earth tools," muttered. A crystalline being whose body looked like it was carved from a giant diamond. No energy signatures, no quantum resonance, no molecular disruptors. "These objects are barely more sophisticated than rocks." The Valkyrian waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "Harmless organic materials and simple metal alloys. The human may proceed." Jin-woo nodded gratefully and snapped his briefcase shut. As he walked through the energy archway, he felt a slight tingling sensation, like walking through a gentle electric field. The advanced scanners had probably analyzed every molecule in his body and found him about as threatening as a houseplant. The council chambers were even more impressive than the corridors. The room was spherical, with delegates seated on platforms that floated at different levels throughout the space. Some creatures hung from the ceiling like bats, while others swam through tubes filled with glowing liquid that ran along the walls. The center of the room featured a massive holographic display showing star charts and trade routes that looked like a 3-dimensional spider web made of light. Jin-woo found his designated platform and took a seat. His simple metal chair looked ridiculously plain compared to the floating meditation pods and energy cocoons the other delegates were using. A few nearby aliens glanced at him with what he interpreted as mild curiosity, the way you might look at an interesting bug you found in your garden. The first 3 hours of negotiations went smoothly. They discussed trade agreements between the Outer Rim colonies and the core worlds, debated shipping routes through asteroid fields, and reviewed safety protocols for encounters with space pirates. Jin-woo mostly listened and took notes with his ballpoint pen, occasionally asking simple questions that made the other delegates exchange those looks again. Then the lights started flickering. At first, nobody seemed too concerned. The massive holographic display wavered slightly, and a few of the floating platforms bobbed like boats on choppy water, But within minutes, the situation escalated quickly. Warning sounds started blaring, and alien voices began chattering in panic across multiple languages. The station's environmental systems were failing, and none of their advanced technology could figure out why. Emergency lights bathed the chamber, in red, and Jinwoo could see genuine fear in the eyes of creatures who'd probably never experienced anything their technology couldn't handle. The crystalline delegate's body was flashing like a disco ball, the floating jellyfish was pulsing frantically, and even the confident Velkarian guards looked worried. That's when Jinwoo calmly stood up, opened his briefcase, and got to work. Council. Archivist Yun Mira's 6 robotic arms moved like a dance as she pulled up holographic files from the central database. Her cybernetic eyes glowed bright blue as she scanned through thousands of classified reports, each one more unbelievable than the last. The emergency session had been called after Jinwoo's latest incident, but as Mira dove deeper into the archives, she realized this wasn't just a one-time problem. This was a pattern that went back years. The assembled delegates watched nervously as floating screens materialized around the chamber, each one displaying a different human encounter. Mira's voice, artificially enhanced through her vocal processors, echoed through the silence. The first major incident occurred 6 months ago on Aquatia Prime, she began, pulling up a 3-dimensional map of the ocean world. The planet rotated, slowly, showing vast seas that sparkled like liquid diamonds under twin suns. Ambassador Lee Do-hyun had been invited to witness the Great Spawning, a ceremony that happened once every decade when the Aquatians released millions of their offspring into the sacred tide pools. These weren't just any pools. They were living ecosystems that had been carefully maintained for over 50,000 years. The water had to be perfect, with exact chemical balances that the Aquatians monitored using technology that could detect changes down to individual molecules. But something went wrong. The pools started turning a sickly green color, and baby Aquatians began floating to the surface. Panic spread through the ceremony as thousands of years of tradition faced extinction. The Aquatian scientists rushed in with their most advanced equipment, machines that looked like floating jellyfish made of crystal and light. But nothing worked. Their sensors couldn't even identify what was killing the pools. That's when Do-hyun stepped forward. While the Aquatians panicked and their million-credit machines failed, the human ambassador calmly removed his belt. The leather strap had a simple metal buckle, nothing fancy, just basic Earth-made steel. Next, he untied his shoes and pulled out the laces, plain cotton strings that probably cost less than $1 back on Earth. The Aquatian crowd watched in confusion as Do-hyun knelt by the dying pools. He bent the belt buckle into a specific shape, tied the shoelaces around it in a complex pattern, then pulled out a breath mint from his pocket. The mint dissolved in the water, and somehow, incredibly, the makeshift device began working like the most sophisticated chemical analyzer ever built. Within minutes, Do-hyun had identified the problem. Microscopic organisms from a nearby volcanic vent were changing the water's acidity. Using the same ridiculous collection of everyday objects, he created a correction system that not only saved the spawning, but made the pools healthier than they'd been in centuries. The Aquatians called it a miracle. Their scientists called it impossible. Mira switched to the next file, and the delegates groaned collectively. They all remembered this one. Engineer Kim Hae-jin had been attending the annual Galactic Technology Expo on Station Prometheus, a massive space platform where the galaxy's most advanced civilizations showed off their latest inventions. Picture a floating city the size of Manhattan, filled with robots, aliens, and gadgets that could reshape reality itself. The security was supposedly perfect, with scanners that could detect a dangerous thought from 3 star systems away, but someone had planted a bomb in the station's power core, a device so sophisticated it was invisible to all the high-tech sensors. The bomb was designed to destroy not just the station, but create a chain reaction that would take out the entire solar system. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the galaxy's greatest minds couldn't even find the thing. Hae-jin was eating lunch in the cafeteria when the alert started blaring. She looked down at her meal picked up her spoon, and tied her hair back with a simple elastic band she'd been wearing around her wrist. The spoon was just cheap metal, probably worth about 50 cents. The hair tie was basic rubber, the kind you could buy in bulk for practically nothing. But in Hye Jin's hands, these worthless objects became something extraordinary. She modified the spoon's surface tension and used the rubber band's elasticity to create a resonance detector that could sense vibrations the bomb was making in the station's structure. The device she built in 15 minutes was more sensitive than security equipment that cost millions of galactic credits. Not only did she find the bomb, but her improvised detector also identified the saboteur hiding among the delegates. The would-be terrorist was caught red-handed, and an entire solar system was saved by kitchenware and a hair accessory. But the incident that really scared the Council had happened just 2 months ago, and it involved a kid. Cadet Choi Min-ho was only 19 years old, barely out of Earth's Space Academy. He'd been selected for a cultural exchange program with the Crystalline Confederacy, an ancient civilization that had mastered the art of growing living crystals that could store and process information. Their homeworld looked like a giant geode, with crystal cities that sang in harmony with the planet's magnetic field. The Confederacy's sacred resonance crystals were their most prized possessions, artifacts that had been growing for 3,000 years. These crystals could communicate across vast distances by vibrating at specific frequencies, creating a network that connected their entire civilization. It was beautiful, mystical, and utterly beyond human understanding. Until Min-ho showed up. With his backpack full of school supplies, the kid had rubber bands, the kind students use to hold their notebooks together. He also carried a small handheld mirror for checking his appearance, nothing more sophisticated than what you'd find in any teenager's bag. But somehow, Min-ho figured out how to use these simple objects to modify the crystal's resonance patterns. What happened next terrified the Confederacy. Their sacred 3,000-year-old communication network suddenly exploded into something they'd never imagined possible. The crystals began reaching across the entire galaxy, connecting civilizations that had never spoken to each other. The network became more powerful and efficient than anything the Confederacy had developed in 3 millennia of careful cultivation. A teenager with rubber bands and a pocket mirror had revolutionized their most sacred technology in an afternoon. Mira's mechanical voice grew quieter as she delivered her conclusion to the stunned delegates. Every human interaction follows the same pattern. They see potential where we see simple objects. Nothing remains unchanged in their presence. The grand debate chamber erupted into chaos as Representative Zalthek's metallic fist crashed down on the podium with a sound like thunder. Sparks flew from where his reinforced appendage struck the crystalline surface, and his optical sensors blazed red with fury. The 7-foot-tall robot's body was a masterpiece of engineering, built from self-repairing nanometal that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury. But right now, he looked more like a walking weapon than a diplomat. These humans are dangerous. Zalthek's voice boomed through speakers embedded in his chest, the sound waves making nearby delegates duck for cover. Ambassador Jung Soo-bin turned our quantum processors into something we didn't even recognize. Our own technology became foreign to us. The memory still burned in his circuits like a virus. Jung Soo-bin had visited the Mechanical Union's primary manufacturing world, a planet-sized factory where robot workers had been perfecting quantum computing for over 2,000 years. Their processors were marvels of engineering, each one containing the processing power of an entire civilization, capable of calculating the movement of every atom in a solar system. Soo-bin had asked for a tour, and like fools, they'd agreed. She'd walked through their most secure facilities, carrying nothing but a handbag containing makeup, snacks, and what she called girl stuff. The security systems had scanned her belongings and found nothing threatening, just organic compounds and simple plastics. But within 3 hours of her visit, their quantum processors were doing things that violated the fundamental laws of physics. Using lipstick, hair clips, and chewing gum, Soo-bin had somehow modified the quantum field generators in ways that increased their processing power by 3,000%. The robots couldn't understand how it worked, couldn't replicate it, and couldn't even figure out what she'd actually done. Their most advanced technology had become alien to them, improved by a human with cosmetics. Across the chamber, Councillor Velnara of the peaceful Nebula Collective rose gracefully into the air, her translucent tentacles swaying like underwater plants. Her species looked like living clouds made of stardust, beautiful and serene, communicating through patterns of light that danced across their ethereal forms. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes singing in a gentle breeze. But consider Engineer Park So-young's contribution to our dying star system. Velnara's lights pulsed with calm blues and golds. She used kitchen utensils from the station cafeteria to create a stellar stabilization device. Our scientists said it was impossible. The Nebula Collective's homeworld orbited a dying star that had been slowly expanding for centuries, threatening to consume their entire civilization. Their greatest minds had worked for generations to find a solution, building massive space-based machines that could theoretically contain stellar expansion. These devices were monuments to their scientific achievement, each one the size of a small moon and powered by the collected energy of a dozen planets. But they weren't working. The star continued to grow, and their people faced extinction. Park So-young had been visiting as part of a cultural exchange program when she learned about their crisis. She'd been eating in the station cafeteria, using simple metal utensils, to enjoy what she called surprisingly good space noodles, when she suddenly stood up and asked to see their stellar containment equipment. What happened next defied every principle of astrophysics the collective had spent millennia developing. Using a fork, a soup ladle, and some aluminum containers from the cafeteria's takeout service, So-young had built a device that somehow harmonized with their massive containment systems. The improvised gadget, held together with tape and powered by a portable battery, had accomplished what their planet-sized machines couldn't. The dying star stabilized. Their entire civilization was saved by kitchenware. The debate chamber filled with angry voices as more delegates joined the argument. General Krextar of the Torvak warrior clans stomped forward, his massive form covered in battle scars and ceremonial armor that had been forged in the heart of a neutron star. The Torvak were proud fighters who had conquered half the galaxy through pure military might, but even this giant looked uncomfortable as he spoke. Human diplomat Han Ji-soo ended our century-long civil war, Krextar growled, his voice like grinding stone. She used nothing but origami made from treaty documents and a child's toy. The other delegates turned to stare. The Torvak Civil War was legendary throughout the galaxy, a conflict so brutal and complex that it had raged for over 100 years. Entire star systems had been destroyed, billions had died, and the finest military strategists in the galaxy had failed to find a solution. The war had become so ingrained in Torvak culture that many believed it would never end. Han Ji-soo had arrived carrying only diplomatic papers and a small plastic puzzle cube that she claimed helped her think. The Torvak leaders had laughed at her, a small human woman trying to solve what their greatest warriors couldn't. But Ji-soo had done something unprecedented. She'd taken the peace treaty documents and folded them into intricate paper sculptures, each one representing different factions in the war. Then, using movements learned from solving her puzzle cube, she'd demonstrated how the factions could reorganize themselves into a stable configuration. The origami peace accord that resulted wasn't just a treaty. It was a living system that adapted to changing circumstances. It had held for 6 months now, longer than any ceasefire in Torvak history. Warriors who had been killing each other for generations were now working together, all because a human had turned paperwork into art. Dr. Velmora, of the Medical Consortium, floated forward on her anti-gravity platform, her crystalline body chiming softly as she moved. Dr. Lim Yunji saved Zerion Prime, she announced, her voice like crystal bells. The plague that was killing the colony couldn't be cured with any known technology. We sent our best doctors, our most advanced medical equipment, but nothing worked. Zerion Prime had been a thriving mining colony until the plague hit. The disease was unlike anything in the medical databases, attacking victims at the cellular level in ways that seemed almost intelligent. The colony's population was dying, and the Medical Consortium's best efforts had failed completely. Lim Yunji had arrived with just a standard medical kit, the kind of basic supplies any field doctor might carry. But she'd also wandered through the colony's common areas, examining things that had nothing to do with medicine. Soap dispensers in the bathrooms, light fixtures in the hallways, food packaging from the cafeteria. Within 3 days, she'd fashioned treatment devices that not only cured the plague but revolutionized the colony's entire medical infrastructure. A soap dispenser became a precision drug delivery system. LED light panels were converted into cellular regeneration chambers. Even the cardboard food containers were transformed into diagnostic tools, more sensitive than anything in the consortium's arsenal. The plague was eliminated, and the colony became healthier than it had ever been, all thanks to bathroom fixtures and take-out containers. As the hours passed, more and more delegates shared their stories. The peaceful gardener race told of how human botanist Oye Jin had revolutionized their agricultural systems, using kitchen utensils and cleaning supplies, creating food production methods that were both more efficient and more environmentally friendly than anything they'd developed in their 10,000-year history of farming. The ancient archive keepers, beings made of pure information who had spent eons collecting knowledge, spoke nervously of student Kang Min-seo. She'd visited their great library and somehow improved their data storage systems using paper clips and rubber erasers, creating information networks that could process and store knowledge in ways that transcended their understanding of mathematics itself. Chief Analyst Zendar, a being whose species had evolved purely to process and understand patterns, stood at the center of the chamber. His body was a shifting mass of geometric shapes that constantly rearranged themselves as he processed information, and right now those shapes were forming increasingly complex and disturbing patterns. "The pattern is undeniable," he declared, his voice a harmony of mathematical frequencies. "Humans don't just use tools, they reimagine reality itself. In their hands, every object becomes something greater than its original purpose. They see potential where we see limitations. They find solutions where we see impossibilities." The chamber fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Every species present had encountered this phenomenon. Every interaction with humans had resulted in their most fundamental assumptions about reality being challenged and changed. The question that hung in the air wasn't whether humans were dangerous or beneficial. The question was whether the galaxy was ready for a species that could turn anything into everything. Ambassador Seo Junho stood at the center of the massive council chamber, his holographic presentation floating around him like a three-dimensional constellation. Trade route maps stretched across the room, showing shipping lanes that connected thousands of worlds in a web of commerce that kept the galaxy's economy running. Junho was explaining a new proposal for safer passage through the asteroid belt of Zerion when disaster struck. The presentation flickered once, twice, then vanished completely. Emergency lights bathed the chamber in red as alarms began blaring throughout Station Nexus 7. The massive communication array that kept the station connected to half the galaxy had just gone dead, cutting off contact with billions of beings across dozens of star systems. Panic rippled through the assembled delegates like a shockwave. The crystalline beings started chiming in distress, their bodies flashing urgent colors. The floating jellyfish creatures pulsed frantically, and even the stoic robot representatives began calculating emergency protocols with visible concern. This wasn't just an inconvenience. Without FTL communication, the station was blind and deaf to threats from space pirates, natural disasters, or the 100 other dangers that plagued interstellar travel. Ships carrying vital supplies could be lost, colonies could face emergencies without help, and the entire galactic government could collapse if they couldn't coordinate with their member worlds. The station's chief engineer, a spider-like creature, with 12 legs and a head full of blinking diagnostic lights, scuttled across the ceiling toward the communication bay. His panic was obvious as he chittered rapidly in his native language, reporting that their backup systems were also failing and their repair robots couldn't identify the problem. While chaos erupted around him, Jun Ho calmly reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his coffee mug, a simple ceramic cup with "World's Best Dad" printed on the side in Korean. It was a gift from his daughter, nothing special, just a mass-produced item you could buy at any store back on Earth. Next came 3 stylus pens, the kind used for taking notes on digital tablets, made of basic plastic and metal worth maybe $10 total. The aliens watched in growing amazement as Jun-Ho examined the holographic projector that had been displaying his trade charts. The device was advanced alien technology, capable of creating solid light constructs that could be manipulated like physical objects. It represented centuries of research and development, a masterpiece of engineering that most species would consider beyond their understanding. Jun-Ho studied it for about 30 seconds, then got to work. He broke apart the stylus pens, using their internal components in ways their manufacturers never intended. The small circuits and wires became something else entirely in his hands. He modified the coffee mug by scratching specific patterns into its surface with the pen tips, creating what looked like a primitive antenna array. The holographic projector became the heart of his improvised device. Jun-Ho somehow reconfigured its light manipulation systems to generate subspace frequencies instead of visual displays. Using techniques that seemed to come from nowhere, he turned entertainment technology into a communication array that could reach across the galaxy. Within 8 minutes, he had assembled a makeshift faster-than-light communicator that looked like it belonged in a junk pile, but worked better than the station's original million-credit system. The first test transmission crackled to life, and suddenly voices from across the galaxy were flooding back into the chamber. But something was different. The signal wasn't just restored, it was clearer and stronger than it had ever been. Jun-Ho's impossible device had somehow improved the communication quality by 300%, while using nothing but garbage and alien technology he'd never seen before. War Chief Graxon of the Kraxan battle fleet shot to his feet, his massive form bristling with weapon systems that activated automatically when he felt threatened. The Kraxan looked like walking tanks, covered in natural armor plating and equipped with enough firepower to level a city. His voice boomed through the chamber like cannon fire. "This is exactly what we feared," Graxon roared, his weapon systems cycling through targeting sequences as he stared at Jun-Ho's innocent coffee mug. "They can turn our own technology against us. That coffee mug could have been a weapon. Those pens could have been bombs. How can we trust beings who can make anything into anything?" The fear in his voice was real. The Kraxan had conquered worlds through superior firepower and military strategy. But what did military might mean against a species that could turn dinnerware into superweapons? How do you defend against an enemy who sees potential weapons in every household item? Peacekeeper Lumara of the Etherian Collective drifted forward, her energy field crackling with anxiety. The Etherians were beings of pure energy contained within crystalline matrices, ancient and wise, but even they seemed shaken by what they'd witnessed. Her voice resonated like singing crystal, but the harmony was broken by worry. "Their creativity makes our most advanced achievements seem primitive," she said, gesturing toward Jun-Ho's impossible device. "How can we negotiate as equals when they can reinvent our reality with common objects?" "We spent centuries developing that communication array. They improved it in minutes using trash." Emergency votes were called as the chamber erupted into panicked debate. Representative after representative stood to share their own terrifying encounters with human ingenuity, each story more unbelievable than the last. Speaker Veltim of the Gentle Gardener race floated on currents of warm air, his plant-like body swaying as he spoke in a voice like rustling leaves. Human botanist Ye-Jin revolutionized our agricultural systems using kitchen utensils and cleaning supplies. We had been perfecting our farming methods for 10,000 years, believing we had achieved the peak of agricultural science. The two gardeners were masters of growing things, capable of making entire planets bloom with life. Their agricultural technology was so advanced that other species considered them miracle workers. But Ye-Jin had visited their homeworld, carrying nothing but a backpack full of kitchen tools and household cleaning products. Within a week, she had created growing systems that were not only more efficient than anything the gardeners had developed, but also more environmentally friendly. Using dish soap, cooking utensils, and window cleaner, she had revolutionized agriculture in ways that challenged everything they thought they knew about biology itself. The ancient archive keepers, beings made of crystallized knowledge who had spent millions of years collecting and storing information, spoke through their representative with voices that sounded like whispers from the beginning of time. Student Kang Min-seo improved our information storage methods using paperclips and rubber erasers, they reported, their crystalline forms dim with what might have been embarrassment. We are the keepers of all knowledge in the galaxy. Our data storage systems can contain the complete history of entire civilizations. We believed our methods were perfect. But Min-seo, just a college student studying library science, had visited their great archives carrying a backpack full of school supplies. Paper clips, rubber bands, erasers, the kind of cheap stuff students buy in bulk at the beginning of each semester. Using these simple tools, she had somehow created information networks that could process and store knowledge in ways that transcended the archive keeper's understanding of mathematics and physics. Their million-year-old data systems suddenly seemed like primitive cave paintings compared to what a human had built with office supplies. As story after story poured out, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Fear mixed with awe as the truth became clear to every delegate in the chamber. This wasn't about humans carrying weapons or using advanced technology to threaten other species. The real threat was much more fundamental and terrifying. Humans couldn't be contained because they saw potential in absolutely everything. Every object, no matter how simple or mundane, could become something else in human hands. A coffee mug could become a communication device. Kitchen utensils could revolutionize agriculture. School supplies could rewrite the laws of information science. The galaxy had encountered a species that didn't just use tools. They saw the universe itself as one giant toolkit, ready to be reshaped according to human imagination. And that terrified everyone. The grand voting chamber fell silent as Councillor Prime Zedthara's ancient voice echoed through the crystalline halls. His species had been around for over 50 million years, witnessing the rise and fall of countless civilizations, and his words carried the weight of eons. The massive creature looked like a living mountain made of starlight, his form shifting between solid matter and pure energy as he spoke. "The evidence is overwhelming," Zedthara declared, his voice resonating through dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive. "The motion is called to vote." One by one, the voting crystals around the chamber began to glow. The Mechanical Union's representatives cast their votes through synchronized data bursts that lit up the room like lightning. The aquatic Hydronians voted by changing the color of their containment tanks from blue to deep red. Even the mysterious Shadow Collective, being so advanced they existed partially outside normal spacetime, manifested brief flickers of agreement. In the visible spectrum, the final tally appeared in holographic numbers that floated above the chamber. 847 votes in favor, 0 against, 12 abstentions. It was the most unanimous decision in Galactic Council history. Resolution 2847X, the Human Prohibition Directive, is hereby enacted, Zedthara announced. From this day forward, no human delegate shall be permitted to carry any objects, tools, or clothing with removable parts into Galactic Council meetings, the HFY. Chamber erupted in what might have been relief, though it was hard to tell with so many different species, expressing emotions in completely different ways. The crystalline beings chimed like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. The robotic delegates flashed their status lights in synchronized patterns, and the gaseous creatures changed colors in swirling displays that painted the room like an aurora. But before the celebration could fully begin, Councillor Prime Zedthara raised one of his massive appendages for silence. His ancient eyes, older than most star systems, held a wisdom that made even the proudest species pay attention. "However," he continued, and the word hung in the air like a thunderclap, "while we fear their unpredictability, we cannot ignore their value. These humans have solved problems that have plagued us for millennia. They have saved entire civilizations with nothing but household items. I propose the creation of a new position, Human Innovation Consultant." The chamber buzzed with discussion as species debated among themselves in dozens of languages. The idea was revolutionary. Never before had the Council created a position specifically for one species, let alone a species they had just voted to restrict. But the logic was undeniable. Humans were too dangerous to roam free with access to random objects, but too valuable to ignore completely. After 3 hours of debate, the vote was called again. This time it was closer, but the result was the same. 612 votes in favor, 198 against, 37 abstentions. The Human Innovation Consultant Program was approved. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Kwon Tae-min stood outside the council chamber wearing the most ridiculous outfit he'd ever seen. The specially designed jumpsuit looked like something a prisoner might wear in a high-security facility. It was made from a single piece of seamless material with no pockets, no buttons, no zippers, no drawstrings, and no removable parts whatsoever. Even his shoes were permanently attached to the suit, integrated into the design, so they couldn't be removed and repurposed. The jumpsuit was bright orange, supposedly to make him easy to spot, but Tae-min suspected it was really just to make him look as non-threatening as possible. He felt like a walking traffic cone, but he understood the necessity. After Jun-ho's coffee mug incident, the council wasn't taking any chances. The consultation booth they'd designed for him was even more extreme. It looked like a smooth white egg made of some unbreakable alien material that had no corners, no edges, no texture, and no features whatsoever. There were no buttons to push, no panels to remove, no surfaces that could be modified or repurposed. It was the most boring room in the galaxy, designed specifically to give humans nothing to work with. As Tae-min stepped into the booth, he couldn't help but smile. The aliens had tried so hard to create a sterile environment that they'd actually created something fascinating. The booth's perfect smoothness and complete lack of features was itself a kind of tool, a blank canvas that represented infinite potential. Within an hour of the session beginning, something remarkable happened. Requests started flooding in from across the galaxy, transmitted through the booth's built-in communication system. The first call came from the mining colonies of Kepler 442b, where a strange mineral deposit was interfering with their extraction, equipment in ways their scientists couldn't understand. "Human consultant," the mining foreman's voice crackled through the speakers. "Our machines keep changing behavior when they encounter this new ore. What would you do?" Tae-min leaned back in his featureless chair and thought for a moment. "Tell me about the patterns," he said. "Does the interference follow any kind of rhythm?" As he listened to the description, Tae-min began to see possibilities that the aliens had missed. Without any tools or equipment, using nothing but questions and logical thinking, he guided the miners toward a solution that not only fixed their problem, but turned the interfering mineral into a valuable resource that could improve their technology. The key second call came from the diplomatic corps dealing with a trade dispute between two species who had been arguing for 50 years. The third was from astrophysicists trying to understand why a star was behaving in ways that violated known physics. The fourth was from terraforming engineers who needed to solve an atmospheric problem on a new colony world. By the end of the Tae-min had fielded over 200 requests from across the galaxy. Problems that had stumped entire civilizations for decades were being solved by a human sitting in an empty room, using nothing but his mind and the ability to see connections that others missed. Word spread quickly through galactic communication networks. The consultation booth became the most requested piece of technology in known space, not for its advanced design or sophisticated features, but for the simple fact that it contained human potential. Species that had never even heard of Earth were putting in requests to consult with the human in the smooth white room. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In trying to contain human ingenuity by removing all tools and objects, the Council had actually created the purest expression of what made humans special. Stripped of everything except their ability to think differently, humans became even more valuable than before. As the weeks passed, the consultation booth became the beating heart of galactic problem-solving. Engineers consulted with Tae-min about impossible construction projects. Scientists asked him to review theories that had puzzled them for centuries. Even military strategists sought his advice on conflicts that seemed unsolvable. The booth itself became legendary. Alien children drew pictures of the smooth white room where the humans sat. Artists created sculptures inspired by its perfect simplicity. Philosophers wrote essays about the meaning of containing infinite potential within finite space. 3 months after the Human Prohibition Directive went into effect, Councillor Prime Zed Thara visited the consultation booth personally. The Ancient, being materialized outside the smooth white walls, his starlight form casting rainbow patterns across the chamber. "Are you satisfied with these arrangements, human consultant?" he asked through the communication system. Taemin looked around his featureless prison and smiled. "You know what's funny," he said. "You tried so hard to take away our tools that you gave us the greatest tool of all." "And what is that?" Zed Thara asked, genuinely curious. "Complete freedom to think," Taemin replied. "Without any objects to distract us, we can focus entirely on seeing possibilities that others miss. You've created the perfect environment for human innovation." Zed Thara's ancient consciousness pondered this for a long moment. In trying to contain humanity's most dangerous trait, they had actually perfected it. The consultation booth wasn't a prison. It was an amplifier that boosted human creativity to its maximum potential. As Taemin sat in his smooth white room, fielding calls from across the galaxy about everything from stellar engineering to diplomatic crises, he couldn't stop smiling. The other species would never understand that the most dangerous tool humans possessed was never something they carried in their pockets or briefcases. It was simply the way they thought, and no booth, no restriction, no prohibition could ever contain that. The ND.